Hello and welcome to Fashionably Safe, Protecting the At-Risk Populations in Chad, Africa, a silver award project for the girls in Stuttgart, Germany. Today we're going to teach you how to make simple dresses. These can be done with a pillowcase or with yardage of fabric. And at the end we're going to do a bonus dress, making a dress with sleeves. For these projects, please use your imagination of colors and have any kind of fun with patterns and designs. Just please do not use solid yellow because that makes a political statement that we don't think you want to do with the girls. For this project, you can use a new or used pillowcase that's gently used. We're going to do that as our fourth project. You can use yardage of fabric. Other supplies that you will need include double fold bias tape, 1/4 inch elastic, which is 0.64 centimeters. You will need coordinating thread. If you do not have bias tape or elastic, you can use ribbon. You will also need a tape measure. Very handy are seam gauges. You will need scissors, either shears or nippers. Also very handy is a hemming tool with marks. You'll want pins. And you'll also want the armhole pattern that you can find on stuttgartgirlscouts.org underneath the Fashionably Safe, Protecting the At-Risk Populations in Chad, Africa Silver Award Project patch. And the directions that are written out are also found there. You'll also want needles, or if you are privileged enough to have a serger or sewing machine, you will want those items as well. To start your project, you are going to want to measure your fabric. You will use an entire yard or an entire length of fabric one way, and how much of that yard or meter you have depends on how big the dress is going to be. This yardage of fabric is actually 19.5 inches or 49.5 centimeters. According to our chart, this will become a small dress. So you would use the small armhole pattern. We're going to make this dress third. This dress is just over 30 inches or 77 centimeters. This, according to our chart, would become a medium dress. So we would use the medium cutout on our pattern. We're going to make this dress second. And this dress is 34 inches or 87 centimeters. This will become our large dress. We're going to make this dress right now. So if you're following along on the directions, direction number 1 says cut a fabric rectangle the length and width of the dress of fabric depending upon size. The finished dress length is measured from the shoulder to the hem. So with this large, it is between 33 and 37 inches or 84 to 94 centimeters long. And we'll just use this entire yardage of fabric. Step 2 says to fold the fabric in half and sew along this seam. So we're going to sew it with right sides together. These are the right sides, this is the wrong side. We're going to sew right sides together along this seam. And this will create the back seam of the dress and we'll make one big tube. Side note, I like to serge the edge of the top and the edge of the bottom to keep the fabric from raveling. So I will do that and sew the back seam. Follow me to the serger next. We're going to sew along the raw edge of the dress just to make sure that it does not ravel. I'm using my serger. This can be done by doing a narrow hem on the bottom and when we do the casing, but I like to make it very secure. Now that we have sewn the top edge and the bottom edge with our serger to encase the raw edges, we're going to sew that back seam, which is step number 2. We're again going to fold in half, and we are going to pin the selvage edge together. Some people do not need to use the pins, other people do. It is up to you. Now we are going to serge this edge. You can hand sew it, or you can sew it with a sewing machine. You can leave a seam allowance, or on this dress I'm just going to cut off the selvage edge. So I'm using just over my 1/2 inch or 1.5 centimeter seam allowance. And now we have a tube of fabric. Right. Then we come to the ironing board. We always press it flat to warm up the seam. And then we open the fabric and press it to one side. Or if we sew it with a sewing machine, we press the seam open. This is now the center back. We're going to find our center front. The way to do that is with our back, we have it open, and we just match the center back with the opposite side. So now that is the back of the dress, and you're looking at the front of the dress. Now we're going to move on to step 3. Meet me at the table. Now that we have our back, we have our front, we need to cut out the armhole sleeves. You can use the measurement on the pattern that we have on StuttgartGirlScouts.org. A very fast way to do it is to actually fold it in half, so that way the back seam and the middle center seam are together and the armpits are in the same spot. And then you only need to measure once. We're going to take the large pattern and we're going to mark it and cut it. This is where you can use your pins to pin it in place. And take your scissors. We are going to cut along the outside of our large pattern. And when we open it up, you'll see we have a front and a back with 2 armholes. So that was step number 3. For step number 4, we're going to fold under the casing 1/4 inch, which is about the measurement of our board here, our fabric. Actually, this one does not have a 1/4 of an inch marked, so we're going to use our seam gauge, and our 1/4 of an inch is just beyond where our thread was. We're going to iron that up, and when that's ironed up, we're going to give it another 1/2 an inch, which is here, and we're going to iron that. So meet me at the ironing board. Has inches. We're going to, there's 1 inch, 1/2 an inch, 1/4 inch. We're going to iron up a 1/4 of an inch. To show what that is in centimeters, that's this side of the seam gauge. There's 1, there's a 1/2 centimeter, so it is 0.7 centimeters for a 1/4 of an inch. And then we can use this tool and measure up a 1/2 an inch, which as you can see is 1.37 centimeters. If you serge, you don't necessarily have to do the 1/4 of an inch first, but it does give it a nice clean edge. Okay, that was the front. We can pin it in place. And do the same on the back. All right, we are going to continue with step 4. We're going to now edge stitch the casings. You can do this on a sewing machine or you can hand stitch. We're basically going to stitch right along the edge of this fold line to make a casing at the top. And that creates a casing at the top. You need to make sure that you catch everywhere. I came very close to missing there, but it's actually in. This will hold the elastic in place. Now for step 5, we are going to cut the elastic into 2 equal lengths based off of the chart above. Since this is our large dress, we need 16 inches or 40.5 centimeters. So we take the elastic to here. You can see 40.5 to 16, and we cut. Then we take this elastic. If you notice, it's already as big as the casing. So this is half of the elastic we need. We're going to cut in 2 equal lengths by folding in half and snipping. One is for the front, one is for the back. We're going to thread the elastic through by putting a safety pin into the elastic on one end. And I like to put a vertical, another safety pin if I've got it, at the other end going perpendicular to the elastic. This will help the elastic from pulling out the other end. And now we're going to thread the elastic through the casing that we just made. We're going to put the elastic through the casing that we made. We're going to push, 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 and pull the elastic through. Push and pull. Push and pull. Push, pull. Push, pull. Push, pull. I'm just threading the elastic through. Notice the elastic at this end is already held in place, not going anywhere because we put the safety pin up backwards, or perpendicular. When you get all the elastic through, give it a good tug. This gathers the front of the dress. You can undo the elastic here. Pull the elastic out of the casing a little bit and secure with a pin. We're going to go to the sewing machine and sew across the edge to secure the elastic in place in both the front, or both sides of the front and the back. And this can be done by hand or by machine. Make sure that the fabric's nice and firm, and we pull the elastic out just a little bit. And then we'll go sew these in place. We're going to do the same for the front as we do for the back. We're going to sew the elastic shut in each of these 4 casings so the front and the back gathers can stay secure. You can do this hand sewing. I'm doing it on my machine. I'm actually going to move to a zigzag stitch. So for me that's pattern 2. And I'm going to make my stitch length smaller. So I'm going to go to 2. Because this is small elastic, it won't take much to put it in there. Throw it out of the way. We're just going to go along the edge. On a sewing machine you can sew over needles, but I do not recommend it. However, it is a little easier on a sewing machine. So we're just going to go along the edge. Hold the elastic in place. And then back stitch. Go forward. And go back. And go forward. This way it has 4 chances of catching the elastic and keeping it tight in the casing. And we clip the edges, and we do the same on all 4 of these elastic casings. So that way the elastic is nice and secure in the edge there. Alright, now we're going to start with step 6, which is cut 2 38-inch lengths of double fold bias tape. You notice this is actually single fold bias tape, but it is wide enough that when we open the package that we can easily turn it into double fold just by doing another fold. So we're going to cut 2 38-inch lengths. We're going to start here. We're going to go to 38. Which is 96.5 centimeters. And we're going to cut 1 and then cut a second one. .38 or 96.5 and cut there. We don't have much left. That's okay. Alright, next what we're going to do is we're going to fold this inside out. So see how there are 2 edges? We're actually going to take these folds and go like this, and we're going to stitch across the edge here. And we're going to do that at all 4 ends to make sure that we are going to have nice straight edges for our ties. So we're going to sew those 4 pieces right there. Meet me at the sewing machine. Okay, so now that we have it folded in half, we're going to sew the edge. Make sure we're back at 3 and on a straight stitch. That's another one I like to do 4 times back and forth, so it makes it nice and secure. So this way, when we go to turn it inside out, we can use the closed scissors to get a nice point. That will make a nice straight tie when we're done. We're going to continue and do the other 4 edges. Remember, fold in half backwards. We're going to sew it shut. It helps if you start where the folds are and continue. And then we'll do the other 2 sides here. Okay, so we are in the middle of step 6, where we cut the 2 lengths of 38-inch bias fold tape, opened and sewed the sides, turned them right side out. If you have double fold bias tape, you don't need to iron it flat. We had single fold bias tape, so we ironed the bias tape so it turned into double fold bias tape. We're now going to take these 2 pieces and they're going to go on each armhole. We find the middle of the tape, and then we find the middle of our armpit, and then you'll notice on double fold bias tape, there's one side of the bias tape that is shorter than the other. You put the short side on the outside. So that way, when you sew on the top, the short side is smaller and you are sure to catch the back side. So we have the middle of our tape, the middle of our armpit, and we put them together. And the wonderful thing about bias tape is that it is very stretchy and allows curves to move with it. So we just put the edge of the fabric right up in the fold. And then you will, when we go to sew, we will sew along the edge here to sew the bias tape shut and continue around the armpit all the way up to the other end. So that way we will create the straps. I'll finish pinning and I'll meet you at the sewing machine. Alright, so we're back here at the sewing machine. We've pinned all of the bias tape over the armhole, sandwiching the regular fabric in the bias tape. You want to check to make sure that at the top of the dress, the ties are even at the top on both sides. And since the ties are even, we will go ahead and edge stitch along the bias tape. Make sure that we're back on straight stitch and a regular stitch length. Be careful at the top here. You're going to be going through a lot of fabric and elastic. So go slow. And you might even want to do back stitch, because that's where the dress attaches to the ties. And you'll see it's sewn on both sides. And there's one armpit done with ties. We're going to go ahead and do the same to the other armpit. So now we have finished step 6, which was cutting and sewing on the bias tape to the armpits. To finish up the arms, shoulders, we tie bows at the shoulder seams. And this will obviously depend on the size of the girl and her shoulders as to how long these tapes will be. But we have 2 shoulders there. For step 7, we're going to hem the lower edge by turning in 1/4 inch and then ironing up 2 inches and edge stitching around the bottom. So we'll go to the iron and iron it, and then we'll go to the sewing machine and sew this. All right. So remember, we're going to go 1/4 inch, which is 0.7 centimeters up, and then we're going to go 2 inches, which is 5 centimeters, and that will be our hem. So we ironed up our 1/4 inch, ironed up our 2 inches, or 0.7 centimeters and 5 centimeters. Now we're going to edge stitch along the top. Of course, if you think that the dress should be longer, you don't have to give it an entire 2-inch hem. You could just do a narrow hem of 1/4 inch, 1/4 inch, or 0.7 and 0.7. Now we're going to edge stitch along the hem. Every time you stop the machine, make sure the needle is in the fabric. I like to stop when I'm very close to the edge and pull the thread to the inside, the bobbin thread, to make it nice and neat. And I do the same with the other side. And then I tie the knot together. Good threads, and the dress is complete. This dress is now complete. However, if we wanted to get fancy, we could put pockets on the dress. We can match them up so that way we totally have an optical illusion. Or we could use the rest of our bias tape and put a corner on the top and shift it so we can obviously find the pockets. But what girl doesn't love a dress with pockets? So to put a pocket on, we just put down the edges on each side of 3 sides, not all of them, and we sew down the 3 sides onto the dress. And I want to put a decorative white strip on top so the pockets stand out. So I will put that on top. I will sew down the edges. That's optional. If we don't want to, we're done. If we wanted to add ribbon around the bottom edge, we could. If we wanted to add flowers or patches or anything to spice up the dress, we can. But for the most part, this dress is now complete. We ask when the dresses are complete to please wash them and then fold them up nice and neat. Put them in a resealable Ziploc bag or resealable plastic bag and label it with the size and donate it to the Patch Arts and Crafts Center. So this is going to be a size large dress, which is a size 10-12, and we'll write that on the Ziploc bag and donate it. Thank you. Right, now we are going to work on our second dress. We're going to do a dress with bias tape ties. And this dress will have 2 ties, 1 on each shoulder. To start this, we're going to follow steps 1 through 3 above, which were cut a rectangle of fabric, the length and width of the fabric depending upon the size, and fold the fabric in half, meet the selvage edges, and stitch or serge the seam. Press open or to one side, and the center of the seam will be the stitched tube. And that becomes the center back of the dress. I've already done that. Step 3 is to cut the armhole. I was just showing that this is going to become a medium-sized dress. So we're cutting the armhole, which is 2 inches by 5 inches. So now we're going to cut out the armhole. Alright, so now we're going to sew the bias tape around the armpit. You're going to stitch right along the edge to make sure that you're catching the bias tape along the edge of the bias tape and sandwich in the dress. Clip the edges. Make sure that we catch both sides. And we did. Now we're going to go make the casing. So we're going to iron down 1/4 inch, iron down 1 inch, and then we're going to sew the casing shut to be able to thread the fabric through. So we're going to go to the iron now. Okay, so now we're going to fold up 1/4 inch, which is this line right here, which is very close to 1 centimeter. It's actually 0.7 centimeters. So we fold it there, and we iron it down. Give it a quick check. Yep, 1/4, 1/4, 1/4. Now we're going to
go down 3/4. That's not on this board. So now we're going to go to 3/4 or 2 centimeters. This one I can't eyeball as easily. And now we're going to edge stitch this casing shut on both the front and the back. I already pressed this one down. And you can pin it if needed. So along the casing. Okay. Sometimes they get a little caught. Clip at the ends. Make sure the casing is shut. That's what it looks like on the outside. Then do the front side. Now we're going to go over to this side of the table. Right, so we have sewn the casing in the front and back of the dress. We've done the armpit holes. We even skipped ahead and did step 7 of hemming the bottom of the dress. So now we're on option 1 of step 6. This dress pattern has 2 options for number 6. So this one, we're going to cut the remaining bias tape in 2 equal pieces. If you notice it looks a little different from the last time, it's because I turned the single fold bias tape into double fold bias tape by ironing it in half. So now we have our 2 equal pieces. We're going to flip these inside out, sew across the edge here, and then we're going to flip it back out to make it a nice even edge. And then we're going to edge stitch the tape so it stays shut. We're going to do that for both of these pieces. On the back side. Now that it's secure, throw those down. I'll flip this strap inside or right side out. Use your scissors to push it in. Give the corner a little snip. Now you can either use the zigzag stitch or a straight stitch. I'm just going to use a straight stitch. You see how the bias tape has one side that's shorter than the other? It helps if you sew it on the side that's shortest. Maybe we will do that zigzag. Notice I did not back stitch, so I'm going to have to cut. But there it is, holding the tape shut. I'll do the same on the second strap, and I will meet you back at the dress. Okay, so you see we've done a narrow zigzag stitch to close it shut. We have our casing here. Put a safety pin in, and we're going to thread our bias tape tie through the casing. Do that push and then pull. Push, pull. Push, pull. Alright, we come out the side. Now we're going to do the same on the back side. Notice this has your edge going this way. So always have this thread this way. Otherwise, if we go backwards, it could get stuck. So go with the fabric so it won't get stuck. And see, it just goes straight on through. If we were going to go the other way, it totally gets stuck. We'd rather not spend time getting stuck. All right. And we'll take off the safety pins. And this could technically be done, but we're going to make it super secure. So we're going to take this, fold it in half, and then pull on the threads to make sure they're all going to be the same length. Oops. Okay, so here's the front. Notice that one's taller. We're going to pull, straighten it out. Oops. Nice and flat. What we're going to do is take a pin and put it in the middle here. We'll come back to that. Okay, the back side. There's our middle. Oops. We want those to match. So we'll pull. So they're nice and even. And then we're going to put a pin right here. And we're going to go to the sewing machine where we put these pins. We're going to do a stitch here in the middle of the front and back. This will prevent the ties from pulling out of the dress. We're going to pull. We could just cut, but I want to tie knots, so I will give it a little extra and then tie knots on the inside. We're going to go to the front and do the same thing. And see, these keep the dress from pulling. So now you can tighten up the front, adjust it to however big it should be on the front and the back. We will tie knots here, or tie bows. And the dress is done. I'll tie these knots and we'll go back to the table. Alright, so here's your finished dress. Step 7 is to do a hem in the bottom, same as the first dress that we just did. To wear this dress, we tie it at the shoulders, and the young girl can make it as tight as she wants or as loose as she wants. And this just goes up over the shoulders. And because we sewed it here in the middle of the front and the back, it should last a lot longer for the young lady, and the ties won't come out. So when you're finished, wash the dress, launder it, and then fold it up and put it in a resealable bag labeled, this is size medium, 5'7". Squeeze out the air. Squeeze out the air. And seal it up. And then you can go ahead and donate this at the Patch Arts and Crafts Center in our donation bin. Thank you so much, and stay tuned for making this dress, but doing option 2 of step 6. All right, welcome back to making the second option of the dress with ties. This one's our small dress. How do we tell it's our small dress? Because we measured it, and top and bottom, this is not quite 19.5 inches, about 19.25 inches, or 49 centimeters, give or take. So according to our dress size, that will be a small. So we're using the small armhole pattern, and we went ahead and stitched it together. I did use the first option where I used a sewing machine and seam allowances to cut out the salvage edges. So the salvage edges are still there. This dress could become wider if you need it to, but it does have writing on the salvages. So that's an option if you do not have a serger. So we're going to cut out the armholes. This is the same as option 1 and option 2 that we just did. You can see we have our little armpit holes. These are too tiny to make pockets, but they could make adorable little pockets if you didn't want them functional at all. But we like functioning pockets. So here's our front and our back. We're going to do the same thing with our double fold bias tape. We're going to take our armpit edge and we're going to pin the armpit shut. This is just a quick base measurement. I'll pin it in a little bit. So there'd be one armpit. And on the other armpit, actually, if you notice, we want to put the skinny side on the outside where we'll be sewing, and the bigger side on the inside. So that way when you sew, you know for certain that you've caught both sides when you're stitching it. So see how this fabric comes up to the fold, and because it's bias tape, it curves nicely. It'll be curved around like that, and we cut. Alright, so these will be sewn on just like the last dress with the armpits. We're going to fold down and fold down just like the last dress, with ironing down and over and sewing the casing shut. Where the difference, oh, and we will also hem up the bottom. If you want to do a narrow hem, it's 1/4 inch and 1/4 inch, so just a tiny little narrow hem. Or you could do your 1/4 inch and your 2 inches and make it a lot shorter. Your choice. But where the difference comes in, option 1 said to cut in half and thread it through. Now this, it looks way too small to be able to tie 2 knots. So what we're going to do is we're going to run both of these through one side and make one bow on one shoulder. And I'll show you that in just a little bit. But first I will sew the edges, fold down the top, make the casing just like the dress we just did, and do the hem just like we just did on the last dress. I'll come back for the video to show how to make the tie. And you prepare the tie in the same way of folding this back, stitching, flipping it inside out, so it'll be nice edges, and then zigzagging the edge. Okay, so because we did a regular casing, when we go to thread through, when we take a safety pin and we're trying to thread it through, it doesn't just go nicely there. It'll try to get stuck in here when you're trying to do the casing. So a quick and easy way to do that is to baste down the casing. To baste down the casing, we go up here to the stitch length and we make it as big as possible. And then we come back to the stitching here and we just go along the edge. Do not backstitch, and just pull and make a long tail and cut. Keep the long tails. This is what we'll use to pull out the stitches when we're done. We're going to do this on both sides, just in case you forget which side you baste down. And then next thing you want to do is come back up to the stitch length and move it back to normal, which is about 3. So this way, when you go to thread the fabric through, it might get caught here, but that's really easy to overcome, as opposed to before when we're going along and it gets stuck here. That's why we do this. Okay. All right, so now we have our very short bias tape. We've made the casing in the top and the back. We even hemmed to the bottom, and the armpits are done. So now we're going to continue on with the second option on step 6 of making the bias tape dress. We're going to thread this through the front and then loop it through the back and continue out that side. Because it's short, we put an extra safety pin on the edge, so that way when it gets here, it'll just stop and it won't go through. So now we're going to thread our bias tape through. Okay, notice we came out the edge. And we have all of this. This is going to stop it. And try to make sure that the cord is not twisted. So we untwist it by pulling it. All right, now it's nice and flat. Now we're going to flip to the back. And we're going to take this same piece and go right through the back side. Notice we get here to the back, middle. Because we did the basting stitch here, it's just going to slide right on through and doesn't catch on the casing or the seam allowance. Pull fabric out. Because this is nice and small, I am going to put this perpendicular, just like we did to the other one, so I can pull the thread this way. So notice these are both very tight. We're going to try to get the same amount of gathering on both sides. So that way when we pull the fabric out, it's evenly gathered with the bunching. So this looks like it might need a little more. From there. If you have a lot of extra bias tape, that is more helpful. All right. So to make sure that the dress stays we pull out an even amount on this side. We're going to pull out 5 inches total, which is 2.5 inches from the middle. So we're actually going to slide this back up. Two and a half inches, which is about 6 centimeters. And we're going to put a pin. And then from that same spot, we're going to do the same 2.5 centimeters. And put a pin. So then the top of the shoulder will be either 5 inches or it will be about 12.5 centimeters. And then we are going to stitch down the shoulders right there. Be interesting. Trim up the threads. And we'll do the same on this side. Trim up the threads. There's that. We'll go back to the table to talk more. Okay, so now that we have these sides secured, we're going to gather up the fabric on this side. We're actually going to take on this side, pull the basting stitches, and just pull and pull and oops, sometimes that happens, and pull and pull. So you should have 4 threads pulled out, and then we're going to gather up the fabric on this side, take out our safety pins, and because we're working with a very small child, this works to tie the bow or tie a knot. Oops. And this dress is complete. So now what you're going to do is you're going to wash this, launder it, dry it. We're going to then fold it, put it in a resealable plastic bag. And label it with the size. This is a small, size 2-4. Try and squeeze all the air out. And then we donate this at the Patch Arts and Crafts Center. Alright, so our last variation is to take a regular pillowcase and cut the edge off. This is a gently used pillowcase. I have gotten the edge of the fabric along the edge of my board and Notice it's not very straight up here, but I am going to make it straight by cutting off the top edge that is sewn. And I'll turn it into a tube instead of a pillowcase. Alright, so now we have a tube of a pillowcase, which is exactly what we wanted. And if you notice, we are now already done with steps 1, 2. We have to do 3, and we did step 7 already because it's already hemmed. I'm going to trim that to make it nice and neat. To determine what size our dress is going to be, we measure it, and our pillowcase is about 28 3/4 or 73 centimeters, which according to our chart makes that a size medium, almost a size large. But because it's a medium, we'll use the medium-sized armpit. So we'll go ahead and use the side that is already sewn shut as our back side seam. Match it up to the center front. Fold it in quarters. Measure it at the top. And put our armpits together to make them nice and even. And you can either use scissors or you can use your rotary cutter, whatever you have. Step 3 is now complete. So there's the front of our dress, the back of our dress, and we need to do our casings. And what happens if we are out of bias tape? We can serge and then fold under the edge and then top stitch. That's what we're going to do on this dress. So we're going to move to the serger. And we're going to serge the top and just go right along the edge. I'm also going to serge along the top. And serge along the next armpit and serge along the back. And serge along the top of the and there is the dress as it stands now. We're going to iron these in and top stitch along the edge here. Okay, because we don't have more bias tape, we're going to move the inside of the armpit and just stitch it down. This is difficult, especially with all of the curves. Oops, if I turn on my iron. Continue. It is a little easier to do this technique if you have a serger, because if you only have a sewing machine, then you have to fold in twice, and then that makes it a lot more difficult to get a smooth edge on the armpits. We'll iron in on the other side. And then we're going to stitch this down. Same with this. I'm going to stitch this on the outside like top stitching. The armpit is folded under. I'm just going to make sure that it does. And now I'm stitching this with white so it has a bit of a contrast. And here is one armpit. Sewn down without bias tape. We're going to do the second armpit. Once again, if you don't want the white to contrast, you can use any color thread you want. Navy blue would match this. Curves are very tricky. I do like the contrast, especially because it matches the binding at the edge. Now we are going to make the casing at the top of the dress. So ironing down and edge stitching. I'm also going to do that in white. And then we run our ribbon through, and I will show you how it looks at the end. Alright, so now you can see that we've sewn down the armpits. we sewed down the casing. You see, I did not flip it up again because this is all serged. It should stay and not ravel. It just gives it the serged edge inside as opposed to the clean folded edge. Now we're going to do a ribbon inside the casing. This is a really gross part, so I'm going to measure at the end. We're going to do a yard, or 2 1/4 yards. A yard is 36 inches by 36 inches by 1/4 yard is another 9 inches. So I'm going to cut off there, and I like to do it at an angle so it's nice and pretty. We're going to go back to the ugly part and put a pin in. We're actually going to put the pin in with the ribbon at an angle, so this way it'll thread through easier. We're going to go through. There's that edge, and I like the two shoulder approach, or the one shoulder approach. So we're going to thread the ribbon through again this way. Make sure that the ribbon is flat on both sides. Continue pulling so that the edges are even. And we are going to cut this edge off, so it's a nice pretty edge. Pull until the edges are match. Bring it back. And this is again gone too far. That's okay. Because then we just need our 2 1/2 inches from the edge. We'll pull our fabric back to there. Check our measurement again. Two and a half. Put a pin in and sew this edge. Put a pin in, sew this edge, just like we did with the last dress. And once we're sewn there, this dress will be complete. And young ladies can pull, make it as tight as they need to. So that'll be complete as soon as we sew on the edges. And another trick for making sure that the ribbon doesn't ravel or fray involves taking a lighter and burning the edge just a little bit. Don't touch it, it'll be hot. And melting the edge. And that seals the edges so it doesn't burn. It doesn't fray. And there you have another dress complete. Alright, so that was making a pillowcase dress out of a pillowcase. Super fast, easy, simple. Showing you the different varieties of not having any bias tape. So using a ribbon and just folding over the edge there. When you're done, don't forget to launder it. Fold it. And place in a bag labeled with the size. Medium size is 5 to 7. And then we zip it up, squeeze all the air out, and donate to the Patch Arts and Crafts Center.